One of my favorite activities to do is to find really cool layouts or designs on the internet and then try to recreate them myself. In fact, I can point to this activity as being one of the things that has helped me progress the most in terms of design and development. Being able to recreate these things and kind of get into the mind of designers who have created something really beautiful is a great way to pick those things apart and start being able to use elements of those great design assets inside your own projects. Well, I was going through one of my favorite sites here, this Tailwinds component site, and I found this section that I just thought was absolutely beautiful. It also presents a few interesting challenges that I wanted to try to figure out exactly how we could do inside of GenerateBlocks. So inside this video, you're going to see me recreate this entire section using GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. Some of it we'll be able to do inside of the UI, and other parts we're going to have to write CSS to make it work. In the end, I think this worked out really well, and I would love to reuse a section like this in a future project because I just think it turned out so nice. So let's go ahead and jump in and I'll show you exactly how I did it. So we are going to take a bit of an iterative approach as we do this. I'm going to build out the simplest version first, then we're going to start tweaking things as we go to make it more and more complex. And I hope that by showing you this step-by-step framework instead of the finished product, you'll be able to see kind of the problem solving that goes into this and how you need to approach each little challenge. So the first thing we're going to do is just get this set up with a section. So I'm going to add a container in here with an inner container. And inside my inner container here, I do have some global styles set up that will give us some default padding. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. Now, just to make sure that it's easy for you to follow along, I'm going to go ahead and try to name some of these things inside of our list view just to make it more clear. So this is going to be our inner container, and this outer container here, this is going to be our section. All right, so inside of that, we need a grid block with a 50-50 column. So I'll add the grid block in here with 2 columns, and we'll do something like 80 pixels of horizontal gap in between them. Over here in the right-hand column, we'll go ahead and tackle that first since it's going to be easiest. We'll add an image, and I'll just grab one of these images from the media library, and we can see it over there. Obviously, we're going to have to do a lot of tweaks to this to make it look exactly like the example, but that should get us a good starting place. Right now, we're just trying to get all the elements on the screen. So over here inside the left-hand column where all of our text is going to be, the first thing we need in here is an icon. I'm just going to go ahead and grab one of the default icons here inside of GenerateBlocks so we don't have to spend a bunch of time sourcing icons. But we'll go ahead and grab this lightning bolt, we'll remove the text, and we'll change the size to maybe 2M, which looks pretty decent. Underneath that, we have a set of buttons. So I'm going to go ahead and add a button here and duplicate it so we have 2 next to each other. I do want to add some gap in between these. So what I'm going to do is grab both of these buttons, and this is a new feature here inside the most recent release of GenerateBlocks. We can grab both of these and press add to container, and this will add both of those buttons inside of a container, which means we can change this to display flex and then use the gap to maybe do 8 pixels of gap in between them. So for this first button, it's going to say what's new, and the second button is going to say just shipped version 1.0. All right, underneath that we have our big headline, which in this case it's like a hero section for a homepage, I'm guessing. So we're going to go with an H1, and this is going to say deploy to the cloud with confidence. Underneath that we can add just a line of lorem ipsum. And then we need another set of buttons to go underneath it. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this one we already created. I'm going to Control-Shift-D to duplicate it, and we'll just move it down to the bottom here. And this gets kind of all the elements we need on the page starting out with in place. So now we can just do a little bit of styling to make this match a little bit better. So here for this icon, I do want to change the color. We'll go with one of our accent colors that's already saved in here, maybe this blue color. For this first button, I do have some global styles that are somewhat similar, so we'll go ahead and use that. This first one is this primary alt. That'll work fine for that. And in this second button, their example is kind of a ghost button. So what I'm going to do is use this same primary alt so I can get the same exact padding and dimensions, but we're going to override the border to make sure that there is no border on it or the border is transparent. And then we'll go into the background color, make sure it always stays transparent. And then for the text, we can say, it's kind of a light gray and then a darker gray on hover. So that works pretty well. Now we do need a little bit of space in between these buttons and that headline. To do that, I'm going to grab the headline here and add maybe 40 pixels of top margin to that. That looks pretty decent. And then we need to do the same down to these buttons down here. Now for this button, this says get started, and it's kind of the primary call to action in this section. So I'm going to use my global styles here and do primary, and that will get our kind of primary design here. And then the second button is learn more. And we can go ahead and grab these same styles here. We'll go ahead and copy that. We'll paste it, and that will take care of making sure that that's kind of styled the same and we have some cohesion there. Now we do need a little bit of gap in between this text and these buttons. So I'll grab this button container and we'll go here into the margin and we'll do a top margin of maybe 60 pixels. So with that, we got kind of the basic styling done and ready to go inside of this section. Let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like on the front end. So we can see here, everything's come across pretty decently, but we want this image to take up all of the screen, all the way to the edge of the screen. So we're gonna have to write some CSS to do this, and we're gonna have to make some tweaks inside of the editor. So what I'm gonna do is go back here into this section, and the first thing I wanna do is just set this to overflow of hidden. Because of the way I'm going to position that image, there's a chance we could cause overflow, and it's not going to really cause any problems to put overflow hidden on this section. So we're just going to change this X overflow and Y overflow to hidden, and that will make sure that no matter what, nothing can kind of escape the bounds of this section. Now next, I want to go to the container that holds the image, which is this container here, and I want to give it a class because we're going to use this particular container to write some of our CSS, and we'll need a way to target it. So I'm just going to scroll down here, and under the advanced column, I'm going to go into the additional CSS classes, and I'm going to do write breakout. And this is just a generic name I'm going to use to make this right-hand column break out of its container. So with that, we'll go ahead and hit update again. We'll go to the front end and hit customize so we can jump in here and start writing some CSS. All right, so inside the additional CSS here, we're going to go ahead and start writing some of the rules we're going to need to make this work. So the class we gave was write breakout. So I want to go ahead and grab that right away so we can start writing some of this. So what we're going to do on this is actually do a position of absolute. And you're going to see right away that it's kind of changed the size of it. It's stuck it all the way over to the side. And this almost looks as if it's done, but you're going to see we're going to run into some problems with this. One example of that is if we bring in the screen here, you can see the image is getting really tiny. And in the example, we want that image to stay really tall. So what we're going to do to fix that, first of all, is say the position we want for this is the top of 0. Now that's going to make it go all the way to the top of the document because we don't have anything set to position relative, which we'll fix here in a second. But I know we're going to need this rule, so I'm going to go ahead and write it in now. The next thing we need to do is do a display of flex. Of course, we can do this inside the UI, so we will go back and probably try to clean a little bit of this up. But just so we can see things working here in the browser, I'm going to go ahead and write this in CSS. Now the next thing we want to do is a height of 100%. And you couldn't really see anything change here, but just to give you an idea, I'm going to go ahead and put a border on here. So now you can see this border. Before I had that height of 100%, you can see the height of that column was only the height of the content inside of it. And we're actually going to need it to take up the full amount of space. Again, this is being contained to the whole HTML document, to the body of the document, and we're going to have to contain that a different way here in a second, but this gives you kind of a visualization of what's happening. All right, now we need to actually target the image within that container, and we need to make sure that it's always taking up 100% of the height. So to do that, I'm going to do this write breakout again, but I'm going to put a space and put img, and this will target an image inside of that class. So for this, I'm going to do a height of 100%. And you can see now that's taking up that full 100% height, but everything's been squished and we need to fix that. So we're going to do an object fit of cover, and you can see that's fixed the proportions of it, but now it's kind of cropped it to the center of that screenshot. So we need to do one more thing, which is object position, and we'll do that top left because we kind of want to anchor that image to the top left corner of it. So as the browser gets smaller, it stays anchored to that top left position. All right, so let's go ahead and publish our changes here. We need to jump back into the editor and set a relative parent so we can kind of contain this inside of its section. So what I'm going to do here is go back into this inner container, and we're going to go ahead and set this position to relative. So what I'll do is go up here to position, and we'll change this to relative and hit update. Now if we go back to the customizer and refresh it, you'll see now the image is being contained inside this inner container. Unfortunately, that's also made it cut off at the edge over here on the right side. I realize that's kind of hard to see here since it's almost white on white, but if I do border 1 pixel solid, you can see that this breakout container is now being stopped at the edge of that inner container, and I need it to go all the way to the end. So we'll go ahead and get rid of this border rule, and we'll go back in here and we can take the relative position off of this. We're gonna have to add an additional wrapper here to make sure that it's contained to the edge of the screens. So with this inner container selected, we're gonna click that Add to Container button again, and that will wrap that inner container in its own container. So on this container, we now have this one going full width, and what I can do is do Position Relative and hit Update. And we'll go back to the front end and refresh. And now we can see that image is going all the way to the right-hand edge of the screen again. So this has turned out pretty nice. This is kind of the look we're going for. And as we make this a little bit narrower, we can see the image is staying kind of anchored to that top left position, and it's just cutting off the image as there's less room for it. Now, there are some stylings that we need to add to this that I think make this section really pop. So let's go back in there and do a little bit more tweaking. So here inside this grid, inside the first container, I want to add a little bit of extra padding on the top and bottom because I want that image to actually be taller than the text over on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is go in here and scroll down to our padding, and we'll do something maybe like 80 pixels top and 80 pixels bottom. And that will just make sure we have a little bit of extra space. In fact, we'll just go ahead and update it. We can jump out of the customizer for now and refresh, and we can see that the image goes all the way up here to the top and all the way down here to the bottom, even though there's some extra space over here. And I think that makes for a better visual impact. I've also noticed on the image, there is some rounded corners and a box shadow. So on this, what we want to actually do is add the border radius to just the top left and bottom left corners. So we'll do something like 2 rem, and we'll do the same down here, 2 rem. And we need to add our box shadow. So here under Effects, we can go to Box Shadow and turn that on. We'll click the wrench, and I usually go with something like 0.7 or 0.8, something very, very subtle, even though this is a pretty light color already. For the horizontal and vertical offset, I'm going to change those to 0, but I am going to make the blur a whole lot bigger and then do the spread something like -5 or -7, and that kind of brings the center of the box shadow in. I really like the effect that this gives. So we'll go ahead and hit Update that and take a look again on the front end. So now you can kind of see the edge of this over here, but we're running into a problem where this is really cramped up against the top of the section. And in the example, there's actually some padding in there as well. Well, this is pretty easy to fix because we've wrapped this relative container inside of the section. So what I'm going to do is go to the section here, and we'll go to the padding in here, and maybe we'll do something like 80 pixels top and 80 pixels bottom, and go ahead and update that. Now here, when I refresh, you can see now we have some room around this image. You can see the box shadow at the top of it. You can see the box shadow at the bottom of it, and this looks a whole lot better. Now, one other nice thing they've done inside this is created a background of this kind of grid looking thing. Now, this is actually really easy to accomplish. I'll actually show you how you can build this out inside of Figma. So what I'll do is jump in here to Figma, and I want to grab the line tool. I'm just going to do a vertical line like this. I'm going to copy and paste it. So now I have 2 of them, and I'm going to rotate this over to make kind of an X. Now we'll go ahead and group this with a Controller Command G, and we'll go to Export and change this to an SVG. And press Export. We'll call this background pattern. Now that we've got that saved, we can jump back in here. We have this section highlighted, and we can go to our backgrounds. What we'll do here is under image URL, we'll just add this new file. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this background pattern SVG and hit select. And you can see we have this cross in here. Obviously, we need to do some more tweaks to this. So the first thing we need to do is change the size from cover to, we want to give this kind of like an explicit size. I'm going to go ahead and do 150 pixels. And you can see it's much smaller down here now. The other thing we want to do is change the repeat from no repeat to repeat, and that will make sure it repeats across the entire section. And then we got just a couple more changes here. we can see it's actually brought this element in front of some of our other elements. So I'm just going to grab this next nested element here and change our Z index, which if we scroll up here is right here under Z index. We'll just put 2, and that will bring it ahead of everything else. Now, in the example, they actually have this pattern kind of on the right side and it fades away on the left side. And we can accomplish this by just doing a gradient overlay. So here under our background, we're going to do use gradient as well. We're going to change this gradient to the pseudo element, which was going to put it on front of the pattern here. And just so you can see how this is working, I'm going to grab 2 colors from our palette here, and you can see this red is here and the blue is here. What I actually want is our background color here completely solid, and then our background color completely transparent over here so that you can see the image behind it. So here I know our background color is this surface 10 color, and over on the right hand side I'm going to grab that same color, but I'm going to bring the opacity all the way down. So now you can see over here on the left side you're not seeing much of the pattern, and as we get to the right you can see the pattern completely. Now I do think that this pattern is a little bit dark, and we can change that by just grabbing the opacity here and sliding it down. If we go all the way to 0, you can see it completely disappears. I think something like 0.25 works pretty well on my screen. I'll probably go ahead and bump that up because I know on the screen recordings it can be a little bit hard to see. So now we'll go ahead and update this, and we'll refresh again on the front end. So now we've accomplished a lot of this layout already. We can see that we have our background pattern in here. Our image is going all the way to the right-hand side of the screen. We got a nice border radius. We have a box shadow, and everything is looking pretty good. But I'm going to show you we have still a little bit of work to go, because as we go into responsive mode here, and I bring this in, here we're actually going to our tablet breakpoint. Everything looks pretty decent here. I'm going to zoom out just so we can see all of this at one time. But as we go to our mobile breakpoint, which should happen right about there, you can see our image is now completely covering up all the text underneath it. So we're going to have to do some changes here. I think on the tablet version, we're okay. We might just want to narrow the gap between the right and left columns. We can do that here inside of GenerateBlocks. But when we go to mobile, we're going to have to do quite a bit of tweaks here. All right, so let's jump out of here. We'll go back into the editor, and we'll open up our list view so we can get back to our grid. So here on our grid, we'll flip over to the tablet, and instead of 80 pixels, maybe we cut that in half and go with 40. Go ahead and update that, and we'll take a look on the front end again and go to the responsive mode, and we can see now at the tablet breakpoint, that looks pretty good. It's a little bit tighter in between those, and I think that works pretty well. Now, of course, we still have this problem on mobile. So to fix that, we're actually going to jump back into the customizer and write a little bit more CSS. So here inside the customizer under the additional CSS, what we're going to do is actually write a MediaQuery for the width of the screen. So this is going to apply some specific rules when the width of the screen is at a certain size or below in our case. So to do that, we're going to do @media. We'll open and close parentheses, and we're going to do a max-width of 768 pixels. Now, I didn't pick that randomly. I picked that because inside of GeneratePress, that's actually what's set as the mobile breakpoint. So what I'm saying with this rule is only apply this when the width is no more than 768 pixels. So inside there, we'll open our curly brackets, and we need to go ahead and write a little bit of CSS. So the first thing we're going to do is tackle this right breakout class. And you can see before we actually set this to a position of absolute. When we go to mobile, I actually just want to put this back to the default position. So the default position here is static. So we're just going to do position static. And so now we can see when we go to our mobile view, it's actually made this image just go underneath it. So basically it's just taken those columns and stacked them, which is kind of the default behavior inside of GenerateBlocks. This works totally fine, but I really like in the example how the image still kind of breaks out of the side. So to accomplish that, I'm just going to write another rule inside of our MediaQuery here. We're going to do right breakout again, but this time we're going to grab our image and open and close the curly brackets. Now before we were making the image 100% height, which kind of gave it that effect where it went off the edge of the screen. Here, the image isn't going to matter if it's 100% because it's stacked. So we're going to have to take a different approach to get it to kind of go off the side of the screen. And what I think works best in this situation is to do a minimum width of 130 VW. Now VW is viewport width. So what it's saying basically is make this image 130% of the viewport width. What's nice about this is no matter what point we're at in that breakpoint from 768 downwards, it's always going to be 130% of that. So you're going to see more or less the same amount of the image. You can see now that the image is kind of breaking out the side there, which is the look we were going for. So we'll go ahead and publish that, jump back out of here and jump into responsive mode. And we can see all the way from our desktop view, we go down to the tablet view here, and we still have the items side by side, which I think looks great. But as we go down here to mobile, we can see the image is still breaking off of the side with the text above it. Of course, this is a really wide mobile screen, but as we get to something more or less probably like you'd see on your mobile device, we have something like this. Hopefully you were able to learn a few new tips and tricks along the way. I just love recreating sections like this because there's always so many little things we can find. You know, we were able to create a background image inside Figma, we were able to do the overlay on it, and we were able to tackle the major part of this demo, which was getting that image to take up the whole right-hand side of the screen. If you did learn something new inside this demo, I'd love to hear it down in the comments below. And obviously there are multiple ways to tackle a problem like this. In fact, I went through the Tailwind code and saw how they were doing it, and they took a completely different approach. Now, I've tried to test this in a lot of different scenarios and it seems to be working fine, but if you have a different way you'd approach this, I'd love to hear about that as well. If you would, go ahead and hit like on this video, which definitely does help spread this video to more and more people. And if you want to make sure to catch me in the next one, hit that subscribe button and we'll see you then.